June begins for Taurus with a powerful desire to distance yourself from everything that drains your energy. Not because you suddenly became cold. Not because you stopped caring. But because something inside you has grown tired. Tired of heavy environments. Tired of complicated people. Tired of emotional situations that leave you feeling exhausted long after they are over. The energy shows a soul that is craving lightness, and honestly, that may be one of the most important realizations of this entire period, because for a long time, you tolerated things that quietly stole your peace. You stayed in conversations that left you mentally drained. You remained in environments that constantly weighed on your spirit. You continued carrying emotional burdens that were never fully yours. And little by little, your mind started sending signals. Your body started sending signals. Your energy started sending signals. But now you are finally listening. There is a very strong phrase surrounding your energy. I no longer want to force myself to stay in places that make me unhappy. And that changes everything. Because once Taurus decides to protect their peace, it becomes very difficult for anyone to take that away. This month carries the feeling of a personal reset, a return to yourself, a return to your own needs, a return to your own emotional well-being. The reading shows your soul asking for something simple but incredibly important. Rest, more sleep, more silence, more moments where you are not solving everyone's problems, more moments where you are not carrying responsibilities that belong to other people, more moments where you can simply exist without pressure. And that is not laziness. That is recovery. There is also a beautiful energy entering your life through people who bring lightness. The reading suggests the presence of someone whose energy feels different from what you have been dealing with recently, someone who helps you laugh, someone who makes life feel less heavy, someone who helps you breathe emotionally. This could be a friendship, a companion, someone already in your life, or someone who gradually becomes more present. What matters is the feeling they bring. Because not everyone enters your life to create problems. Some people enter your life to remind you that happiness can still feel simple, that not every interaction needs to be complicated, that not every relationship needs to feel like work, and that realization becomes incredibly healing. There is another important theme appearing throughout this period. You are beginning to notice exactly how much certain people affect your mental and emotional peace. And that awareness changes the way you approach relationships. Because Taurus has a tendency to endure more than most people realize. You stay patient, you stay loyal, you stay committed, even when situations become emotionally exhausting. But this month shows something shifting. You begin recognizing the difference between supporting someone and sacrificing yourself for someone. There is a person around you who seems to be carrying enormous emotional struggles. Not necessarily a bad person, not necessarily someone with negative intentions, simply someone who appears to be fighting constant battles within themselves. The energy suggests someone who struggles with emotional balance, someone who may sabotage themselves, someone who constantly swings between different emotional states, someone who creates difficulties for themselves without fully understanding why. And for a long time, you may have felt responsible for helping them, for stabilizing them, for protecting them, for carrying them through their difficult moments. But there is a realization happening now. You cannot save someone who is unwilling or unable to save themselves. And that realization changes you deeply, because for years you may have accepted emotional burdens that were never meant to be yours, trying to fix, trying to heal, trying to stabilize, trying to rescue. Now something inside you is beginning to say, I can support someone without destroying myself in the process. And honestly, that is one of the healthiest lessons Taurus can learn. The energy also shows you becoming more aware of emotional boundaries. Not walls, not isolation, boundaries, healthy boundaries, the kind that protect your peace without forcing you to stop caring. You begin noticing who drains your energy, who always arrives carrying chaos, who leaves you mentally exhausted after every interaction, who constantly brings problems but never solutions. And because you notice these patterns, you begin protecting yourself differently, not with anger, not with resentment, with wisdom. And that wisdom becomes one of your greatest strengths throughout this period. There is also a strong connection to work and unavoidable responsibilities. The reading suggests that there may be someone you still have to deal with despite not particularly enjoying their energy. This could be connected to work, family, daily responsibilities, or situations that simply cannot be avoided. But here the energy shows something beautiful. You stop absorbing everything. You stop carrying every emotional vibration around you. You begin realizing that not every person's emotional state needs to become your emotional state, and that creates enormous freedom. One of the strongest messages appearing here involves anxiety, because the reading shows something very interesting. Your anxiety decreases significantly when you slow down, when you rest more, when you stop overstimulating yourself, when you reduce contact with negative influences, when you stop trying to emotionally carry the entire world. The solution is not always more effort. Sometimes the solution is less pressure, less noise, less emotional responsibility, less urgency. The energy shows a deep desire for comfort, for calm, for emotional security, for peaceful environments, for a life that feels sustainable rather than overwhelming. As if your soul has become tired of living in a constant state of tension, and perhaps that is the most important message of all. This month is teaching Taurus that protecting your emotional peace is not selfish. It is necessary, it is healthy, and in many ways, it is the first step toward becoming the version of yourself that has been waiting to emerge for a very long time. There is something very powerful happening beneath the surface of your life right now, and it has far less to do with other people than it does with your relationship with yourself. For a long time, Taurus carried an invisible responsibility. You became the stable one, the dependable one, the person others could lean on, the person who kept things together when everyone else seemed to be falling apart. And while there is strength in that, there is also a cost. Because eventually you start asking yourself a question that you have avoided for far too long. What about me? What happens when the person who supports everyone else becomes exhausted? What happens when the person who provides stability no longer feels stable inside? What happens when the person everyone depends on needs someone to depend on? The reading suggests that June begins answering those questions, not through dramatic events, not through sudden transformations, but through awareness. You start noticing your own needs again, your own emotions, your own limits, and perhaps most importantly, your own value. There is a powerful energy of emotional independence developing around you. You begin realizing that your emotional well-being cannot depend entirely on another person's behavior. It cannot depend on whether someone calls, whether someone stays, whether someone understands, whether someone agrees. For too long, parts of your happiness may have been tied to things outside of your control. Now something shifts. You begin bringing that power back to yourself. And honestly, this may be one of the healthiest transformations you have experienced in years, because there is a difference between loving people and depending on them for your emotional stability. The reading shows you learning that difference. There's also a beautiful sense of rediscovery appearing, as if you are slowly reconnecting with parts of yourself that were neglected. Simple pleasures begin feeling meaningful again. A quiet evening, a peaceful meal, a walk, music, comfort, rest, your own company. These things begin carrying a different kind of value, because for a long time, life may have felt like a constant process of solving problems. Now there is space for something else. Enjoyment, presence, peace, and your soul desperately needs that. There is another important message emerging. You no longer feel the same need to justify every decision you make. For years, you may have explained yourself too much, defended your choices, sought approval, tried to make everyone understand. But now there is a growing confidence, a quiet confidence, the kind that says, I know why I'm making this decision. And that is enough. The reading shows Taurus becoming more selective, more intentional, less emotionally influenced by outside opinions. And that changes your entire energy. Because when you stop living according to everyone else's expectations, you finally have room to build a life that actually belongs to you. There is also a strong indication that certain decisions you have postponed are beginning to demand attention. Things you accepted out of habit, situations you tolerated out of convenience, patterns you maintained simply because they were familiar. The energy shows you questioning those things now, not with anger, with honesty. You begin asking yourself, does this still serve me? Does this still make sense for my life? Does this still support the future I want? And some of the answers may surprise you, because growth often requires letting go of things that once felt permanent. There is another word that appears repeatedly throughout this period. Security. Not only financial security, emotional security, mental security, spiritual security. You want stability, you want peace. You want a life that feels solid. And because of that, you become much more intentional about where you invest your energy, your time, your attention, your emotions. There is also a noticeable shift in your personal magnetism, because something interesting happens when Taurus regains inner peace. Your natural attractiveness returns. You carry yourself differently. You feel more present, more grounded, more confident, and people notice, not because you are trying harder, because you are finally reconnecting with yourself. The spiritual message surrounding this period is simple but powerful. Do not be afraid to slow down. The world constantly tells people to move faster, to do more, to push harder, but your healing does not live there. Your healing lives in stillness, in rest, in presence, in allowing yourself to breathe, and the more you embrace that, the more everything else begins falling into place, because this month is not simply about recovery. It is about rebuilding your life around what truly matters, and for the first time in a long time, you seem ready to make yourself one of those priorities. There is an important warning surrounding your financial energy this month, Not because the reading shows loss, not because it shows failure, but because it shows temptation, And sometimes temptation can be more dangerous than difficulty, The energy suggests that June may bring opportunities that appear almost too good to be true. Promises of quick results, promises of easy money, promises of fast growth, people presenting solutions that seem perfect on the surface. And honestly, that is exactly why caution becomes so important. Because one of the strongest messages appearing around your finances is simple. Not everything that shines is gold. There's a strong indication that certain offers may look far more attractive than they truly are. A financial opportunity, an investment, a business proposal, a purchase, a partnership. Something that initially feels exciting. Yet beneath the surface, there may be details you have not seen yet, and your intuition already knows it. That is the interesting part. The reading shows your instincts speaking before any evidence appears. You may feel that something is being oversold, that someone is trying too hard to convince you that important information is missing, that a promise sounds slightly unrealistic. Pay attention to those feelings, because Taurus is entering a period where caution becomes a financial advantage. This is not a month for reckless decisions. It is not a month for emotional spending. It is not a month for rushing into commitments simply because they sound exciting. This is a month for observation, for planning, for patience, for asking questions, for reading the details, because stability matters far more than speed right now. There is also a strong indication of financial delays, and surprisingly, those delays may actually protect you. You may consider making a major purchase, changing vehicles, taking on a new financial responsibility, making a large investment, booking an expensive trip, or committing to something significant. At first, you may feel eager to move forward, but then something makes you pause, and that pause becomes incredibly valuable. The energy repeatedly shows a feeling of, maybe I should wait a little longer. And honestly, that instinct appears to be correct, because what feels like a delay now may prevent a much larger complication later. This month favors stability over urgency, security over excitement, long-term thinking over short-term gratification. There is another very positive energy emerging around your professional life. Someone may open a door for you, not necessarily through a grand opportunity, but through a conversation, a recommendation, an invitation a connection, something that initially seems small, yet has the potential to become much larger over time. The interesting part is that the opportunity requires responsiveness. The reading suggests that if you hesitate too long, the momentum weakens, not because the opportunity disappears completely, but because timing matters. There is a strong message here. When the right opportunity appears, be ready to move. Not impulsively, but confidently. This energy is particularly strong for people who work independently, business owners, service providers, sales professionals, online entrepreneurs, people who rely on networking and client relationships. The reading shows gradual but meaningful growth, not overnight success, not sudden wealth, sustainable progress. The kind that builds a stronger future. There is also a growing realization that something in your professional life needs innovation. You begin looking at your routines and thinking, I need to do something differently. And that awareness becomes extremely valuable because comfort can become a trap, especially for Taurus. Your sign naturally appreciates stability. But sometimes stability quietly turns into stagnation, and the energy shows you recognizing that distinction. You begin exploring new ideas, new strategies, new methods, new possibilities, not because what you have been doing is wrong, but because growth often requires evolution. The financial energy surrounding June is actually quite encouraging, not because it promises immediate rewards, because it encourages smart decisions, and smart decisions have a way of creating rewards later. The reading suggests that your greatest financial strength this month will not be risk-taking. It will be discernment, the ability to recognize what deserves your trust, the ability to walk away from what feels uncertain, the ability to choose long-term stability over temporary excitement. And that mindset has the potential to protect and strengthen your future in ways you may not fully understand yet. Because Taurus is entering a period where wisdom becomes more profitable than impulse. And that may turn out to be one of the most valuable lessons of the entire month. Now, the reading moves into one of the most significant areas of your life this month, love. And honestly, the energy here may surprise you, because this is not a period where Taurus appears desperate for a relationship, It is not a period where you are willing to sacrifice your peace simply to avoid being alone. In fact, the exact opposite is happening. There is a powerful phrase surrounding your romantic energy. My commitment right now is to myself. And that phrase explains almost everything, because after certain disappointments, emotional struggles, and exhausting experiences, you have started understanding something important. Love should not cost you your peace. Love should not require constant suffering. Love should not feel like emotional survival. And because of that realization, you become much more selective. You observe more. You trust more slowly. You analyze more carefully. You pay attention to patterns. You notice emotional consistency. You notice emotional instability. And honestly, that is not coldness, that is maturity. Because now you can quickly sense the difference between someone who brings peace and someone who brings chaos. There is a person appearing strongly in your energy. Someone whose feelings for you run much deeper than they openly admit. The connection is real. The emotions are genuine. Yet there is also confusion because this person seems to move closer and then pull away. At times they appear deeply connected to you. At other times they seem distant, unavailable, uncertain, and that inconsistency creates questions. The reading shows someone who genuinely cares, but also someone carrying unresolved emotional issues, fear, past wounds, trust issues, difficulty with vulnerability, difficulty committing fully. It feels as though one part of them wants to experience this connection, while another part fears everything that comes with it. And that internal conflict affects the relationship. There is also strong indication that this person is carrying emotional pain they rarely discuss. From the outside, they may appear stable, controlled, balanced, but internally the story is different. The reading suggests someone who is struggling more than they let others see. And while they may still maintain some distance now, that distance becomes increasingly difficult for them to maintain because one emotion keeps growing: missing you. The energy repeatedly returns to this theme. This person tries to manage their feelings, tries to stay logical, tries to stay detached, yet your presence continues occupying space in their thoughts. And over time, that becomes harder to ignore. But there is a very important spiritual message attached to this connection. Do not sacrifice your peace trying to rescue someone who is emotionally lost. Because one of the strongest lessons appearing for Taurus this month is understanding the difference between love and responsibility. You can care deeply about someone. You can support someone. You can wish the best for someone without making yourself responsible for fixing everything in their life. That distinction becomes essential because the reading clearly shows you beginning to understand something powerful. You can love someone without destroying yourself in the process. And honestly, that realization changes your entire romantic energy. For a long time, you may have associated love with sacrifice, with endurance, with carrying emotional burdens, with tolerating instability. But now something different is emerging. You begin valuing peace, balance, reciprocity, consistency, emotional maturity. More than dramatic promises, more than temporary intensity, more than emotional highs and lows. And that changes the kinds of relationships you are willing to accept. There is another realization becoming increasingly clear. Many people carry emotional struggles that only they can resolve. No amount of love can do that work for them. No amount of patience can do that work for them. No amount of sacrifice can do that work for them. And finally, Taurus is beginning to understand that truth, not as a rejection of love, as an act of wisdom, because this month is teaching you something profound. Real love should add peace to your life, not constantly take it away. And that lesson may completely transform the future of your relationships moving forward. There is a quiet transformation happening inside you now, not the kind that everyone notices immediately, not the kind that creates dramatic scenes or sudden announcements, the kind that changes your life from the inside out, And honestly, it may be one of the most important transformations of this entire period, because for a very long time, Taurus believed that maintaining relationships required enduring almost anything. Being patient, being understanding, giving second chances, giving third chances, sometimes even giving 10th chances. You convinced yourself that loyalty meant staying. That commitment meant enduring. That love meant carrying more than your share of the emotional weight. But something has changed. The reading shows you beginning to understand that emotional balance is also an act of self-love. And that realization changes everything. You start looking at certain people differently, not with anger, not with resentment, with clarity. You begin recognizing how much energy certain relationships require, how much emotional labor they demand, how much peace they cost. And for the first time, you allow yourself to ask an important question. Is this relationship nourishing me, or is it constantly draining me? That question becomes a turning point because some of the answers are impossible to ignore. There is a specific connection that continues appearing strongly throughout your reading. Someone who carries a great deal of emotional complexity. Someone who may genuinely care about you. Someone who may even love you, but someone who is still struggling with themselves. The energy repeatedly shows internal conflict surrounding this person. One part of them wants closeness. Another part fears it. One part wants commitment. Another part avoids it. One part reaches for connection. Another retreats into distance. And because of that, the relationship often feels inconsistent, unpredictable, emotionally exhausting. The interesting thing is that you are beginning to see it more clearly. Before, you may have focused entirely on the feelings. Now you are paying attention to the reality. And reality matters because love alone cannot create stability. Love alone cannot create emotional maturity. Love alone cannot solve problems that someone refuses to address within themselves. And this realization is making you stronger. There is also a beautiful sense of emotional self-sufficiency growing inside you, not isolation, not loneliness. Self-sufficiency, the ability to enjoy your own company, the ability to create happiness without depending entirely on another person, the ability to feel complete without constantly seeking validation. And honestly, that changes the relationships you attract, because when Taurus stops begging for love, you naturally become more selective about who receives access to your heart. There is another strong indication involving someone from the past. The energy suggests a person who is trying to maintain emotional distance, trying to appear detached, trying to convince themselves that they have moved on. Yet internally, the story looks very different. The reading shows lingering attachment, lingering thoughts, lingering emotions, as if this person continues carrying feelings they have not fully resolved. There is a phrase surrounding this energy. They can control their actions for now, but they cannot control their feelings forever. And honestly, that seems to describe the situation perfectly, because the absence becomes more noticeable over time, the distance becomes more difficult, the silence becomes heavier, and eventually emotions demand attention. But here is the important part. You are no longer willing to accept just anything because feelings exist. And that may be one of the strongest signs of your emotional growth, because there was a time when love itself felt like enough. Now you understand something deeper. Love matters, but peace matters too. Respect matters, consistency matters, emotional stability matters, shared effort matters. And if those things are missing, feelings alone are no longer enough to convince you to stay. There is also a noticeable change in your behavior. You speak less, observe more, react less, reflect more. You become more selective about where your energy goes. You stop engaging in unnecessary drama. You stop participating in conflicts that lead nowhere. You stop trying to fix situations that are not yours to fix. And that creates something incredibly valuable. Peace. Not temporary peace, sustainable peace. The kind of peace that comes from finally understanding that not every problem belongs to you. The spiritual lesson surrounding this period is profound. Not everyone you love is ready to walk beside you in the way you deserve. And understanding that truth can be painful, but it can also be liberating, because once you accept it, you stop forcing connections that are not growing naturally. You stop carrying relationships alone. You stop sacrificing your well-being for people who are unwilling to meet you halfway, and that freedom changes everything. The energy shows Taurus entering a new phase, a phase where emotional peace becomes more important than emotional intensity, a phase where calm becomes more attractive than chaos. A phase where you finally realize that the healthiest love is not the love that consumes you. It is the love that allows you to remain yourself while sharing your life with someone else. And that realization may become one of the greatest gifts this month has to offer. Perhaps the greatest prediction for you this month has very little to do with money, very little to do with romance, very little to do with other people. Perhaps it has everything to do with freedom. Emotional freedom, because the energy repeatedly shows Taurus reaching a point where you finally understand something that took a long time to learn. Your peace is worth more than any exhausting connection. And once that truth settles into your heart, your entire life begins changing. There is a powerful awakening taking place inside you, as if after years of carrying emotional weight, something finally says, I don't want to live this way anymore. Not because you have become selfish, not because you have stopped caring, because you have become aware of what drains you, aware of what nourishes you, aware of who brings calm, aware of who constantly brings chaos, and awareness is often the beginning of transformation. There is something else beginning to change in the way you view your future. And honestly, this shift may be one of the most valuable developments of the entire month. Because for a long time, your focus has been directed toward managing what was directly in front of you. Solving today's problems. Handling today's responsibilities. Managing today's stress, putting out today's fires. And when life stays in that mode for too long, something important happens. The future becomes smaller, not because your dreams disappear, because your energy becomes consumed by survival. The reading shows that changing now, little by little, you begin looking ahead again. You start imagining possibilities. You start revisiting plans you abandoned. You start thinking about experiences you still want to have, places you still want to see, goals you still want to achieve, and perhaps most importantly, you start believing those things are still possible. because there was a period when disappointment made everything feel distant, as if every dream required a struggle, as if every opportunity came with a hidden cost, as if every step forward would eventually lead to another setback. But that perspective is beginning to soften, not because life suddenly becomes perfect, because your spirit is recovering. And when your spirit recovers, your vision expands. There is also a very strong indication that you begin trusting yourself more. This may sound simple, but it changes everything. For too long, you second-guessed your instincts, questioned your decisions, doubted your perceptions, especially when other people disagreed with you. Now something feels different. You begin noticing that your intuition has been right far more often than you gave yourself credit for. You notice how many situations you sensed before they happened. How many people revealed exactly what your instincts warned you about. How many outcomes unfolded exactly as your inner voice suggested they would. And because of that, your confidence grows. Not confidence in controlling life, confidence in navigating it. There's another beautiful energy appearing around personal freedom, not freedom from responsibilities. Freedom from emotional obligations that were never yours. The reading shows you releasing guilt, releasing pressure, releasing unrealistic expectations, especially expectations placed upon you by other people. You begin understanding that your life cannot be built around making everyone else comfortable. And honestly, that realization feels liberating because some of the emotional weight you have been carrying was never yours to carry in the first place. There is also a powerful sense of renewal surrounding your daily life, small improvements, small victories, small moments of happiness, the kind of things that might seem insignificant to others, but become deeply meaningful after periods of emotional exhaustion. A peaceful morning, a good conversation, a productive day, a moment of laughter, a sense of calm. The reading suggests that these simple experiences begin restoring something important inside you. Hope, not dramatic hope, quiet hope, the kind that grows steadily, the kind that rebuilds confidence, the kind that reminds you that life can feel good again. And perhaps that is exactly what Taurus needs right now. Not intensity, not chaos, not dramatic changes. A return to simplicity, a return to balance, a return to yourself, because the more connected you become to your own peace, the more clearly you begin seeing the path ahead. And for the first time in a long time, that path looks much brighter than it did before. There is another lesson emerging during this period, and it revolves around something Taurus rarely gives away easily. Trust, not trust in other people, trust in life itself. Because after enough disappointments, enough delays, enough situations that did not unfold the way you hoped, it becomes easy to approach everything with caution, to expect complications, to prepare for disappointment before anything has even happened, to assume that if something feels good, there must be a problem hidden somewhere beneath the surface. And honestly, that mindset protected you for a while, but now it may be limiting you. The reading suggests that June is slowly teaching you how to remain wise without becoming closed, how to remain cautious without becoming fearful, how to remain grounded without becoming pessimistic. And that balance is powerful because there is a difference between protecting your heart and locking it away completely. The energy shows Taurus learning that difference. There is also a strong indication that new opportunities begin arriving through unexpected channels, not always through careful planning, not always through strategies, not always through the paths you originally imagined, sometimes through conversations, through chance encounters, through people you did not expect, through situations that initially seem unimportant. That is why the reading repeatedly encourages openness, not blind openness, conscious openness. The willingness to explore possibilities without immediately dismissing them, the willingness to listen before deciding, the willingness to consider new directions without abandoning your wisdom, because some of the most meaningful developments entering your life now may arrive quietly. Without dramatic announcements, without obvious signs, without immediate certainty, there is another message connected to your personal growth. Stop measuring yourself only by what you have not achieved yet. This is important because Taurus often focuses on unfinished goals, unreached milestones. future ambitions. And while ambition can be healthy, it sometimes prevents you from recognizing how far you have already come. The reading shows tremendous growth. You are more emotionally aware than you were, more emotionally independent than you were, more selective than you were, more conscious of your value than you were, and perhaps most importantly, you are no longer willing to abandon yourself to maintain unhealthy situations. That growth deserves recognition, because many of the lessons you have learned were not easy lessons. They were earned through experience, through disappointment, through resilience, through choices that required courage. There is also a beautiful sense of alignment beginning to appear. Your values become clearer, your priorities become clearer, your boundaries become clearer. And when clarity increases, life often becomes simpler, not because challenges disappear, because decisions become easier. You know what belongs in your life, you know what does not. You know what supports your peace. You know what threatens it. And that awareness becomes one of your greatest strengths moving forward. The reading closes this chapter with a powerful reminder. You do not need to chase peace. You do not need to earn peace. You do not need permission to choose peace. You simply need to value it enough to protect it. And the energy suggests that Taurus is finally reaching that point. A point where inner calm becomes more attractive than emotional chaos. A point where self-respect becomes stronger than old attachments. A point where your future is no longer built around surviving difficult situations, but around creating a life that genuinely feels good to live. And that shift may become the foundation for everything beautiful that follows. As this cycle approaches its conclusion, there is one final transformation that continues appearing throughout your energy, and it is not happening around you, it is happening within you, because the reading shows Taurus reaching a point where peace is no longer just something you want, it becomes something you refuse to negotiate. And that changes every area of your life. For years, you may have tolerated situations because you hoped they would improve. You stayed patient, you stayed understanding, you gave people time. You gave circumstances time, you gave relationships time. And while patience is one of your greatest strengths, there comes a moment when patience must be balanced with self-respect. The energy shows you reaching that moment now, not with anger, not with bitterness, with clarity. You begin realizing that some things have already shown you exactly what they are. Some people have already shown you exactly who they are. Some situations have already given you all the information you need. And because of that, you stop waiting for dramatic changes that may never come. You stop holding your breath. You stop postponing your own happiness. You stop putting your life on pause. And honestly, that may be one of the most liberating experiences of the entire year. There is also a strong feeling of emotional stability growing inside you. Not because every problem has disappeared, not because every question has been answered, because you are becoming less dependent on external circumstances to create internal peace. That is powerful. Because life will always bring uncertainty. People will always be unpredictable. Situations will always change. But when your stability comes from within, those things lose much of their power over you. The reading shows exactly that. A stronger Taurus, a calmer Taurus, a more centered Taurus. Someone who no longer reacts to every emotional storm. Someone who no longer feels obligated to absorb every problem. Someone who finally understands that protecting your energy is an act of wisdom. There is another beautiful message appearing here. You are becoming more comfortable with your own path, less interested in comparisons, less interested in proving yourself, less interested in competing with anyone else's timeline, because one of the hidden sources of stress has been the feeling that you should be further ahead, further along, more accomplished, more certain. But the energy suggests that this pressure begins fading. You start understanding that your journey belongs to you. Your timing belongs to you. Your growth belongs to you. And that realization removes a tremendous amount of unnecessary weight. There is also a sense of gratitude quietly emerging. Not forced gratitude, not pretending everything is perfect. The kind of gratitude that comes from recognizing how much you have survived, how much you have learned, how much you have grown. Because when you look honestly at your journey, one thing becomes very clear. You are not the same person you were a year ago. You are not the same person you were 6 months ago. Life changed you. Experience changed you. Challenges changed you. But those changes were not punishments. They were preparation. Preparation for the version of yourself that is emerging now. And that version feels stronger, wiser, more selective, more emotionally secure. The final image surrounding your forecast is beautiful. It is the image of someone setting down a burden they have carried for far too long. Not because life suddenly became easy, because they finally realized the burden was never theirs to carry. And once they release it, everything feels lighter. The road ahead feels clearer. The future feels more peaceful. And the heart feels free again. That is where Taurus is heading now, toward greater peace, greater stability, greater emotional freedom, and perhaps for the first time in a very long while, toward a life that feels aligned not with what everyone else expects from you, but with what truly makes you happy. There is one final message surrounding this entire journey, and it may be the most important one of all. The reading keeps returning to the same realization. You are not being asked to become someone new. You are being asked to return to who you truly are. Because somewhere between responsibilities, disappointments, expectations, and emotional burdens, parts of your authentic self became hidden, not lost, hidden. You became focused on surviving, focused on managing, focused on carrying, focused on enduring. And while those skills helped you through difficult seasons, they were never meant to become your permanent way of living. The energy now points toward something different, toward a life that feels lighter. Not because every challenge disappears, because your relationship with those challenges changes. There is a strong indication that you begin trusting your own judgment more than ever before. You stop looking outside yourself for every answer. You stop waiting for everyone else to agree. You stop needing constant reassurance before making decisions. And that confidence changes your future, because confidence creates movement. Movement creates opportunity, and opportunity creates growth. The reading also suggests that this next chapter will be far more intentional. You become selective with your energy. Selective with your time, selective with your attention, selective with your emotional investment, not because you care less, because you finally understand how valuable those resources are. There is another beautiful realization appearing here. You begin recognizing that peace is not boring. For a long time, part of you may have associated excitement with emotional intensity, with uncertainty, with drama, with chasing answers, with trying to fix situations. Now you begin seeing something different. You begin seeing that peace has its own kind of beauty, a deeper beauty, a more sustainable beauty. The beauty of waking up without anxiety, the beauty of relationships that feel safe, the beauty of knowing where you stand, the beauty of not having to fight for basic emotional respect. And once you experience that kind of peace, it becomes very difficult to settle for anything less. The reading also shows a growing sense of abundance, not necessarily immediate financial abundance, although opportunities continue appearing, but abundance in a broader sense, more emotional freedom, more self-respect, more clarity, more confidence, more alignment. The kind of abundance that starts inside and gradually affects every area of life, because external success feels very different when it is built on internal stability. There is a powerful spiritual message attached to all of this. Stop viewing your sensitivity as a weakness. Stop viewing your kindness as a weakness. Stop viewing your capacity to care as a weakness. The problem was never those qualities. The problem was giving them to people and situations that did not know how to value them. Now that you are becoming more selective, those same qualities become strengths again. And that changes everything. The energy closes with a feeling of completion. Not the end of a story. The completion of a lesson about boundaries, a lesson about self-worth, a lesson about emotional freedom, a lesson about choosing yourself without guilt. And because you learned those lessons, the road ahead feels different, calmer, clearer, more promising. The future no longer feels like something you have to survive. It begins feeling like something you can actually enjoy. And perhaps That is the greatest prediction of all. Taurus is entering a season where peace is no longer a temporary visitor. It becomes part of the foundation of your life. And once that foundation is built, everything else begins growing from much stronger ground.